Everyone. Welcome to this CFPR Artist talk with Tracey Bush. We are recording the session for catch up, just to let you know, and hopefully you can all see Tracey's presentation, so shout if not. If you've got any questions, then please type them in the chat and Tracey will answer them when she's finished. And ready to go.
Okay, hello, thank you for coming to this online talk about my practice. Obviously, I'm one of the artists in residence here at the Centre for Fine Print Research, which I'm really honoured to be doing. It's amazing how much I'm learning every day in the studio in so many different areas. So thank you, CFPR, for inviting me to be an artist in residence. So anyway, the talk I'm about to make covers many areas of my practice. I've tried to focus a little bit on areas of my practice where I'm utilising print. But it is quite a wide-ranging talk, and please feel free to pop any questions in the chat as they occur to you, because I might be on to a different subject on the next slide. So shall I begin? Yeah. Okay, so the first slide here is a set of 9 images called 9 Wild Plants. And these are my latest artwork that I've made. And they are currently in an exhibition in Munich, in the Kunsthalle in Munich, which is a survey exhibition called Flowers Forever. So I will explain a little bit more about the ideas behind that particular project, but this is really starting with my most recent work. And then the next slide, I'm going to jump backwards in time. And this image is an image of my London River books, which I made for at least a decade after leaving my MA in printmaking from Camberwell College of Arts and Crafts. When I was at Camberwell, I particularly specialised in a kind of green embossing technique where I was using large collagraph blocks to create the plate, which sometimes I would ink and sometimes I wouldn't. But when I was at Camberwell, I didn't really explore artist books. That was something that happened very much after I left my MA. I studied bookbinding for a year, and then I started to create this series of artist books, which were all based on the River Thames and its histories. I was particularly interested in the Thames because I actually grew up on a boat on the Thames. So I'd grown up with a lot of books about the river, and I was really fascinated with all that. So these books are in little editions of between 20 and 100, and they're all hand printed on an etching press. And then I tended to either handwrite or rub stamp on top afterwards. The one on the left hand is called Swan Song. The one on the top right is London's Lost Rivers, and that was probably the most successful out of those publications. And it explored the underground rivers in London with very evocative names like the River Fleet and the Tyburn. So again, a little theme developed already there where I started to really research and develop the ideas before going into making a particular production. Okay, so this book called River Stairs was one where I actually didn't spend all my time in a library researching. I actually went out with my camera when I was living in East London and photographed a lot of the access points to the river, which are called river stairs. And then these images, my own photographs, were created as flexo plates, which you're probably familiar with, which were then letterpress printed onto hanji, which is a Korean paper. The Korean paper I'd actually bought when I was on a research trip to South Korea. So that was something that I looked into, was getting a travel scholarship. where I was able to go and explore Korean paper culture. So I wasn't just looking at paper making, I was also looking at the ways that paper is used in South Korea for things like flooring, umbrellas, shoes, all kinds of things, which really changed how I was thinking about paper. So when I came back from that research trip, one thing led to another, and I began to sort of think about paper in a more three-dimensional way. So it was more the substance rather than the surface. Again, I'm jumping to the present now with this last book, which was the last of the River series of books that I made about 3 years ago, which is called The Last Voyage. And with this, it's all printed on hemp paper. So I got very interested in the use of hemp in paper making. And also this was taken from a poem called In Praise of Hempseed, which was written by John Taylor. And he was a kind of people's poet, shall we say, from the 1600s. And he travelled along the River Thames in a paper boat, which was made from hemp. So I got very interested in this, and the book contains a little paper boat, which is printed with a map of his journey. So this is my most recent sort of iteration. And this was printed using, you can see on the right hand of the slide there, I've used a woodblock and lino cut in order to produce these images. And I also used just photocopy and rubber stamping. So it was, again, quite a combination of techniques. And that is in an open edition. So I'm actually going to be making some more of those. So that's The Last Voyage. So this piece, The Beloved Underwing, is probably my, what you would call, signature kind of artwork that I developed really by accident. And I started again really researching entomology, so the natural history of butterflies and moths. And I've done some training at the Natural History Museum where they actually showed me how to pin out collections as they do in the Natural History Museum. And I use the same pins, I use the same labels, and very often the same boxes. So I got really interested in creating something that was like an eco alternative to a collection of real specimens, and also using paper ephemera, because I've always been interested in scrapbooking and using things that I've collected and wondered why I've collected them. So I'm actually sort of using things that reflect the name of the species that I'm making. So this is an actual species called the Beloved Underwing, and I make it out of love songs. So they're all vintage love songs. And I have lots of fun rearranging the words so that it's not the original song. It's almost like a kind of found poem, mixing them all up. So that's this one. And these entomology boxes, I've been exhibiting with several different galleries in London and one in Munich. And I've been exhibiting other artworks as well, but for several years I've been exhibiting with Jagged Art, Eagle Gallery, and Gallery Handwork in Munich. So very often I'll make commissions as well. So sometimes that will be through the gallery and sometimes directly. I'm not actually represented by one gallery, but I work with several galleries. I don't know if that's interesting, because obviously sometimes how you find a gallery and what it's like working with a gallery is different. It really depends on the gallery director. But these are galleries that I've had a good relationship with for several years. This was probably the biggest commission I've ever undertaken. And this was for a cruise ship called Britannia. And I was asked to create this huge box of all the calling points of the particular voyages that they go on. And I've created those out of maps, atlases, charts of all the oceans and seas around the globe, which relate to the journey of Britannia. So that's why it's called the Ports of the World. And I was really lucky because the location for this artwork is next to the library on ship, which is probably quite a nice, quiet, appropriate location. So working to commission, sometimes it's quite difficult to estimate how long something's going to take you. So I would always advise, however long you think it's going to take, double it. And that seems to be a good rule of thumb that I've worked out. So next piece. This is my most recent commission, which I actually undertook during the lockdown, which was quite an interesting experience. This is for British land, and it's for a place called the Dock Master's Office, which is in Bermondsey. And again, I was able to really research the area, the kind of trees that grow naturally, the kind of trees they were intending to plant, because they're redeveloping about a 15-mile area. It's a huge area that they're replanting. And also some of the trees which were associated with timber, which was actually what was imported into the docks in this particular area of London. So I've then recreated all of those leaves out of maps, both historic and modern, of the area all around Bermondsey. And then in the background, you've got a large scale contour drawing of both the river and the contours, both north and south of the location. So the centre square is focused on the location of the building. So it was really nice to make something that was really bespoke and that I could go off in a slightly different direction. They were quite open to suggestions and research. And also I was able to utilise some of the 1980s plans of the area around where they'd originally, some of the buildings that were associated with the press trades that were around that area. So I was able to use those in some of the leaves. So it was quite an interesting project to be working on. So this is one of my projects which I haven't used print actually in this process at all, but it is all paper-based, and it's called the 9 Wild Plants Project. And this started in about 2004. I read about the fact that apparently the average Western person can recognise only less than 10 wild plants, but more than 1,000 brands or logos. So I got really interested in that idea and thought I shall try and collect some responses from people. So I emailed people, I gave out leaflets, I got people to send me their lists of 9 plants that they could recognise. And they actually were quite funny, quite a lot of the responses, because somehow I was making people feel guilty about their lack of knowledge. And then some people actually had been in the brownies or something and knew about 50 plants. So it was quite interesting. So those became an artist book. And then I created the 9 most recognised plants out of hundreds of brands and logos, which were on paper packaging that I had collected. I made myself the rule that I wasn't allowed to buy any product in order to create these artworks. So this was basically the question I asked: how many wild plants could you confidently identify? And that was what I got the answers to. So it might be interesting to just sort of think that lots of people cheated and gave me lists of herbs and things that aren't actually wild plants. And then just thinking how many brands you can recognise. So that was the original idea. And then it became an exhibition with 3-dimensional pieces, some of them in taxidermy cases and glass domes, and then some of them are drawing with collage, and those are the ones that the framed pieces that are on the wall. So this is the idea which I have reprised with my latest set of drawings, which are in the exhibition in Munich. So the next slide, this is an image from the exhibition in 2006. So this was an exhibition I organised myself. I got Arts Council funding. I created the window banners, lots of publicity. So there was quite a lot of different things to learn about in doing that. So back to artist books and back to printmaking. So my interest in natural history is really a lot around also the kind of people who used to make collections. Very often they would be women, and very often it would be a kind of amateur practice, kind of hobbyist naturalist. And I was also interested in the idea of trapping moths as well. So I decided to create a book where the structure of it enabled the moths to be inside, almost as if they were inside a moth trap. And then on the reverse of the book, you've got an A to Z of British moths. And I'll be showing this a little bit later on so that you're able to see a little bit more of that structure. This is all Riso printed, and this was part of a residency I undertook in 2016 at Winchester School of Art, where they had a publisher hub. And I was using the Riso in a slightly unusual way, in that I've used a duotone technique where I print in blue and then print in black over the top. So I wanted that slightly sort of gothic tattoo ink kind of colour. And it's printed on a German paper, which is Hahnemuller, which also knocks back the colour a little bit. So this was a bit of an experiment with Riso printing, which often is very often used for zines, you know, that kind of publishing. So it was a bit of a challenge to try and make something that was printed on an art paper and, you know, giving a bit of a different quality to the ink. So this was an edition of 25, which I printed and bound myself. So that's probably the maximum I would want to make in an edition. So this is the book I made after this, which kind of ran over through lockdown, and because I started it just prior to lockdown and for some time after. So this is a book called 7, which is about the folk magic of 7 British wild plants and creatures. And I started to be really interested in all the kind of lore and myth around some of our really quite common plants. So things that you probably don't think about too much or look at too much. But actually there are, you know, there's so much fascinating stories around these quite common plants. So this, again, is part of research that I undertook. In the centre, I actually use my local natural history collection in the local museum. I often go and draw things that I would have a job getting a barn owl to sit still for me to draw it. So that's why I often use natural history collections. The other images, like the hawthorn on the right, I go out and collect it, press it, and draw it. So that's those 3 images. On the left is another one of the images from the book. That's a spider in the middle. And that was quite easy to get a model for that during the lockdown. I managed to find one in my studio. And on the right is a maquette of the book that was exhibited in British Land. So I have now finished that book. It was screen printed in 3 colours as an edition of 30. So it's quite a lot of screen prints. And I found it myself, and that's it basically on exhibition. So artist books are a slightly unusual area of art practice. Very often galleries are quite reluctant to show artist books, although I'm lucky enough that both Eagle Gallery and Jagged Art do show artist books. But I also really like to do book fairs, particularly artist book fairs. And there's an image on the left there, just looking from my stand at an artist book fair. And on the right, that's the entrance to the Small Publishers Fair. So a couple of the fairs that I do quite regularly are the Fine Press Book Association Fair, which is in Oxford, and the Small Publishers Fair, which is in London. So it's quite unusual with artist books because you're able to actually talk to the people who are buying your work. They're able to look through the book, handle it. It's very much a sort of one-to-one experience really, compared to showing work in a gallery that's framed on the wall. But I actually think it's really appropriate sometimes with printmaking to be able to do things that are maybe a little bit smaller in scale and that you look at that are not behind glass. Another strand to my career, basically as an artist, has been running workshops and devising education projects with all ages. And I've worked with most of the major museums and galleries in London, one or two in other parts of the country. So I've really enjoyed devising things that can be done, very often utilising upcycling. So this is something that is still current, that I'm developing with the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden. And we're working with the paper ephemera, which is associated with the Opera House. So we're using sheet music scores, which are no longer used because maybe they've fallen apart. And also some of the programmes from productions, both past and present. And each time I create an activity, it will be a completely different theme normally. So it will be centred around the particular opera or ballet that's performing. So it's a really different way of working to my usual working in my studio, working on things on my own. With this, I'm working with quite a big team of people to deliver a workshop on that scale. And that's something obviously that I've done alongside my practice for quite a long time as well, which is another strand to, you know, what you might do after art education. Right, okay. So throughout my career as an artist, I've been really interested in paper. So I really, you know, obviously researched paper in South Korea, and I've always, everything I've created has been based on paper, either embossing it or printing it or cutting it, folding it. So I'd always followed the Paper Biennale, which is held every other year at the Museum Rijswijk in the Netherlands. And I was lucky enough last year to be accepted from an open call of about 400 applicants to exhibit in the Paper Biennale last year, the title of which was Transition. And I was able to go to the Netherlands and install some work in some antique taxidermy cases that were supplied by the Museum Schiedam. So I was able to make the work, ship it over, and then assemble it or install it in the gallery. And I created a clod of earth, which is obviously after Dürer, his beautiful drawing of the clod of weeds. Well, I've recreated it using a variety of materials and cut paper. They also exhibited some of my collage drawings, and there are also some little snails in there as well, which I've utilised paper packaging on as well. So it was a great experience to exhibit alongside 19 other artists for whom paper is the centre of their practice. And it was quite interesting as well because it's often in that hybrid area between fine art and craft. So there's often a high level of craft skill involved, but then also utilising concepts behind the artworks that you're creating. So again, it's a bit of a hybrid area of art and design. These images are from the current exhibition, Flowers Forever, in Munich. And that's on until July. So if anyone fancies a visit to Munich, it's an amazing exhibition. It's got a survey of work which is based around plants from all around the world. So it's absolutely fascinating. And on the left there, you can see there's a digital installation by an artist which you can actually walk through the space and. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my residency here at the CFPR. I'm utilising processes which very often are on a bigger scale or incorporating digital imagery. So I'm working really in ways that are outside my usual comfort zone, and that's quite an interesting experience. And I'm sure there are a lot of things that I'm going to return to after the residency. So here, this is one of the two main strands of the artworks that I'm trying to develop. This is a piece which is called Dusking, which is based on photograms of moth drawings, which are then created through a screen in special inks, which change colour depending on how you look at them. So it's quite an involved process to create the artwork at this scale. So it's quite a lot bigger than anything that I've ever printed before. So thank you very much for assistance with working on such a big scale. So you can see the screen on the left there. It's a photo screen being washed out. And then on the top right there are some of the Spectraval inks, which are just mainly extender with a little bit of this very special mica powder, which is mixed in to create these effects. The inks were actually developed by a company called Merck, and they were developed by looking at lusters and things which actually only normally occur in nature. So if you think of like the colour of beetles, and you know, that gives you an idea of what their inspiration was. And then I'm turning it full circle by using them for my own artworks based on natural history. So while I've been here in Bristol, I've been lucky enough to visit the Natural Sciences Department at the Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, and I'm going to be making a return visit. And that obviously the thing I wanted to really research was labelling again, how things are labelled, because the next artwork I'm going to talk to you about, that's really quite an important part of the piece. And again, in the middle there, you can see some incredible beetles which have that kind of petrol pearlescent colour, which I'm going to be utilising in this print. So again, I'm looking at real things, and particularly natural history collections, to be the inspiration of the pieces that I'm making. So lastly, this is the piece which the kind of working title is Lost Wings of Summer, and this is about the 13 British butterflies which are either extinct, so five of them are extinct, and the rest of them are on the red list, so that means they're very critically endangered. And I'm creating these very much as if they are ghost images in an old book, or very faded specimens in a natural history collection. So really almost the thing we have left is the name and the label. So it's very much about the crisis in biodiversity. And I think I will switch over now to my other camera, where I'll be able to show you some of the working maquettes that I've been utilising in order to develop the multiple. So basically here, I've got one of my butterfly boxes. So this is how I would normally make them, which is hand cutting, layering, and then pinning them out in an entomology case. So this is what I'm hoping to recreate in one of the multiples that I'm creating here in Bristol. So I started off by thinking about how I might make a folded base, which I could then attach butterflies to. So here I've been utilising some folding and reverse folding, basically like a little concertina book, which I imagined I was going to be inserting little butterflies into to make a collection. So here's one of my first maquettes. So you can see that the little butterfly here is slotted into the reverse fold. But to begin with, I was thinking that this might be too labour intensive, so I also developed some pieces here it's all cut as one piece. So it's just literally cut and folded from the same piece of paper and can be folded flat. But we discarded this as a possibility and went over to this idea. So I've been developing the baseboard. So you can see with this one here, it's very much based on a concertina. And in actual fact, this part of it is redundant. So I've then made another maquette where we've got a flat area in between all to do. So this is very much how I would work on any project, is making lots and lots of maquettes and working things out. I find it very difficult to work things out just on screen. I like to actually try making things and seeing how it works. So this is pretty much what we've gone with. The butterflies themselves are created from a drawing which has been made into a metal plate. And we have a fantastic machine here, which is a letterpress. So here's the drawing. So this is the drawing. It's been made into a metal plate. This has been engraved. And then this has been printed on the letterpress machine. This. And then this will be laser cut and attached to the baseboard. So this is pretty much where we are. But we're also going to be adding some labels on the background there as well. So here is also going to have letterpress labels. So I'm very pleased how it's developing, and it fits into one of these entomology cases. So that's pretty much where I am with my edition just now. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask. Or if there's anything you'd like me to talk about more.
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask any questions, type them in the chat or just unmute and ask Tracey. Thanks, Tracey.
Hi, Tracey. That was really interesting. When I last saw you, you were experimenting with the color changing inks, and did you find any difference in the way that you printed the inks in the end?
It very much seemed to work best just printing it as one color, and I've tried some of the other directional inks, some of the ones which are blue, just one color, like just blue, just green. They come out of, it's very, very difficult to anticipate how dark they come out. They seem to, what it looks like in the pot and what it looks like when it prints seems to be quite different. So at the moment, that it's still very much the experimental stage, I would say, the screen print. The screen print is much left to be resolved, I would say, whereas this piece is much nearer to actually being a multiple. So,
did you have any idea how many printmaking processes you'd be using when you started the residency?
I must admit, it has surprised me quite how many different processes there are. Yes, it's I suppose also I didn't fully realise the difference between a plot cutter and a laser cutter. And there are it does different things. So the plot cutter is doing all the amazing scoring, which, to be honest, if I was trying to do that by hand, it would be literally impossible for me to create it like that. So yeah, so there's so many different processes which I hadn't anticipated including. And also the letterpress was something I hadn't anticipated either. I had thought I would be embossing it, but it's changed as it's gone along, as things have a habit of doing. So, which has been great. It's been really nice to have input and suggestions that I would not have realised I could have done. So,
question from Angie. You mentioned using the cylinder press to letterpress print your labels. What does this process give you rather than digitally printing them?
Well, actually, the idea for that very much was after I'd visited the Bristol Museum, I was given some labels that they no longer needed, and they were all letterpress printed. And Laura Oaten-Clark, who's the technician here, who's a master printer, was immediately like, oh, these are so beautiful, why don't we do it on the letterpress? So it was just really, it's such a beautiful machine and it's such an amazing process that really is quite rare. It's one of only 10 in the world. And really, if it's there, it's certainly a technique I probably would find difficult to use anywhere else. And it just gives a very slight emboss to the print as well, which is obviously going to be different to digital. And then a rather more mundane reason for not using digital is that the digital printer really doesn't like my Canson paper.
Okay.
It's a bit temperamental, so it doesn't really like using the Canson. So yeah, thanks for the question, Angie.
You mentioned your Riso prints on Hannah Müller paper, the German paper.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you what drove you to decide on using that paper in particular?
I wanted to use that paper partly because of the colour, because it was a very nice kind of soft, almost organic grey, but also because the surface texture was quite soft as well. And the Riso, because it is a soy-based ink, it tends to stay quite soft, the surface. So I thought that it was really appropriate with using moths as the subject matter. It has a slightly sort of dusty look to it. And also Hannah Müller, it's Bugrabuton, so it's one which is often used for book printing.
Okay.
That was the choice.
Thank you, Lizzie.
I hope that helped.